Hello friends and random strangers on the internet watching stuff on YouTube. Every once in a while I talk about something that interests me. Today I am going to talk about two very specific things. The first one is Depeche Mode's third album, Construction Time Again, released in August 1983, or September 1984 if you're in America. But, and probably most urgently, I'm going to talk through this beast, the Anton Corbijn book, Depeche Mode, that was published by Taschen last month and has just arrived. I ordered this before it came out. This is the slightly less expensive version that still has a retail price of £100, which is ridiculous for a book. The Amazon pre-order price when I ordered it was under £50, and obviously thanks to the rules on Amazon is that the lowest price that it was available for sale between the time you ordered it and the time it was released is the price that you pay. So I paid under half price for this. Or if you think about the actual price being the cost for the initial limited edition that was signed with a print that went for £750, I paid under a 13th of the price, which is bloody ridiculous when you think about it. Like all books, I'm going to take the dust jacket off because I'm going to give you a tour of the book as we go along, and the dust jacket is always the first thing that gets screwed up. Now I have to point out this isn't really so much a book as possibly a small building or an installation. It is bigger than my head. It is almost as big as my actual head, and it is certainly as deep. You look at that, that is an enormous beastie there. That's 2 inches thick, maybe even 3 inches. And inside the book we have over 500 pages of very glossy photographs of the band, video shoots, God knows what else, text and images. In fact, rather than give you a page-by-page walkthrough, well, that's not really worth looking at, is it? Let's just go for this. So it says 81 to 18. So the first photographs that Anton Corbijn took of the band were in 1981, and the last ones in this book were in 2018. And it's been 3 years, near enough to the day, since the band played their last show. I think they played their last show on the 25th of June 2018, which is actually 3 years ago tomorrow. I had the terrible dilemma of deciding, or is it July? No, it was July. I'm fibbing. Ignore me completely about that. Anyway, for over 530 pages in here, well, 512 actually, and it starts off with, you know, some text by Anton there, and then he talks about his creative partnership with Depeche Mode, and obviously we've got a number of pictures of the band as we go through the book. Now, what I will say, and this is where I start to talk about the band's early work as well, is that Depeche Mode, I think, became Depeche Mode when Anton Corbijn got involved. Before that, they weren't quite as good as a band. They were lacking a specific visual identity and a cohesive identity. Their single covers, for example, had different covers on the 7-inch and the 12-inch. They had different fonts. They had different imagery, and their imagery was, I didn't think, particularly good. So what we've got is a very luxurious book, ideally designed for coffee tables, if anyone has coffee tables anymore. Focusing on, there's your standard Anton Corbijn type of photograph, the 3 geezers at the back in focus, the one in the front out of focus. He's done that a number of times actually. And there's a 3-piece version of the band not featuring Vince Clarke, taken the day after those other shows. And then all of a sudden we have a leap through to 1986. This is probably about page 10, page 20. And then the next 480 pages are these fantastic photos that we've got that follow Anton Corbijn's very specific visual style, which is high grain, black and white, slightly unusual framing. You know, when you see an Anton Corbijn photo, you just go, that's one of his. He's got a very specific style. And that's one of the great things about great artists, is when you see their work, you can point to it and very clearly just go, yes, that's one of them. The other thing around it is that he's not afraid to make the band look ridiculous or quirky, or apply his very particular European kind of air and approach to it. So the earlier stuff that the band was doing was very straightforward. They didn't have a cohesive look. It looked like four blokes that had been randomly plucked from the street and stuck in front of a billboard and said, looked like a band, and they'd only just met. And it just didn't quite work, really, I think, visually. In terms of the band's style, they dressed appallingly, as they will fully recognise. Their videos were pretty bad. I mean, certainly there's a TV appearance of them doing See You, where they end up spending most of the song cuddling chickens, which is just bizarre. Anyway, you've got, hundreds of pages, almost all in black and white. There's the famous Pasadena Rose Bowl concert that became 101. It's a wonderful book, printed on good, heavy stock cards. It's well presented. It's just gorgeous, really. It is effectively, though, a very glamorized hardback version of all those old tour programs that Anton used to put together. So the tour programs for Music for the Masses, World Violation, those type of things that were generally glossy photo sheets of the band, kind of in various states of repose or standing around moodily. And there's, I'd say 90% of the pictures in this are black and white. Maybe 10% or so are in colour. It's not really his favoured style. Anton's style is not really built towards colour at all. But what you've got is just pictures that go all the way through the band's career, every part of it. There's the hair and drugs years, 1993 to 1994. By the way, you'll notice that Fletch doesn't appear in some of these photographs in 1992. He had a bout of depression and was not present for some of the recording sessions for the Songs of Faith and Devotion album, although you could argue it's not necessarily always clear when he is present or when he isn't, because sometimes I don't think he's played on a record for probably 3 decades now. Hopefully that's not too harsh a statement to make, but when I talk about the other Depeche Mode albums, that is something that I'm going to go through. And there's still 1993. Then we get to the 1995-96 era. Alan has left the band. Colour has come back to the group for a short period of time before we go then back to the Exciter period. Slightly more colour in here, actually. And then you've got actually a bit of a revelation, actually, for me, which is when you buy the One Night in Paris live DVD from 2001. What I found out while reading this book actually is all the photos from the Live in Paris DVD were shot at the show at the Birmingham NEC on the 17th of October 2001, and I mention those because I was at that show. So all that time I've been looking at a photograph taken from a show I was at, and I have no memory of that show at all. I really don't. Actually, the whole of the Exciter tour was a bit of a black spot for me. I didn't like it. I didn't like the album. I thought the live shows were particularly uninspired. I was quite pleased that they were playing perhaps some of the older songs they hadn't played for a long period of time. But at the same point, I was frustrated as well because the album that they were supporting was pretty bad, sorry to say. And here's yet more black and white pictures of Depeche Mode, now firmly ensconced in their millionaire trio status as the world's glummest disco band. It's an absolutely great book, but it is absolutely enormous. It is bigger than a small baby. It's approximately, the size of a small town, actually. It's a really huge beastie. But what it does show is just how important the band's visual identity has been in casting Depeche Mode as who they are. Before Anton got onto the Depeche Mode scene, the band were just not as cool, which makes talking about the early albums a little bit more frustrating. So you look at the artwork that the band had for their early albums, the truly atrocious cover, to speak and spell there, which is a swan wrapped in a transparent plastic bag, a broken frame, which is a much better photograph there of a woman working and toiling on the fields. Construction time again, which had again a workman in front of the Matterhorn. That is the actual Matterhorn. That's not a Photoshop or anything like that. They flew to, I think it's Switzerland. They bought with themselves a huge kind of axe chisel hammer thing, and the guy stood on a mountain near the Matterhorn with the actual Matterhorn in the background. there was a lot of money going around in the 80s, people buying a lot of records. This is long before Spotify made us all dirt poor. And then you've got Some Great Rewards, which, by the way, was shot at a factory which is now the Merry Hill Shopping Centre in Dudley. So you've got obviously a married couple there standing on the roof of a building with a factory in the background. Black Celebration, which is again a bizarre. You know, what you've got there is almost like a set of military flags that are hanging off a skyscraper, not the type of thing that you normally see. And then the last album before Anton Corbijn became involved in the sleeve design for the albums is Music for the Masses. And the common thing that you'll have in all of these sleeves when you look at them is an object in a place where it doesn't really belong. And that ties in with one of my theories, which is effectively Depeche Mode are the disco Pink Floyd, or the electronic Pink Floyd, because both bands had a formative major songwriter who left during the first album period. Pink Floyd had Syd Barrett, Depeche had Vince Clarke. There was also a departure of a major member of the group towards the at least the middle period of their recording career. So, for example, Roger Waters left Pink Floyd in 1984, 1985, and Alan Wilder left Depeche Mode in 1995. So at the same point now, Pink Floyd kind of ground to a halt not long after that, about a decade later, whereas Depeche Mode had managed to sustain a very successful post-Alan career for the past 26 years, and not relying on necessarily solo albums or anything like that, although there have been a lot of Depeche Mode solo albums. I think the imagery is the same, you know, that idea of an object in a foreign place. You look at the cover to A Momentary Lapse of Reason, for example, which has a sea of beds on a beach, the division bell, which has these two massive stone or metal heads in the middle of a field. Animals has a gigantic flying pig next to Battersea Power Station. These are all things you wouldn't expect to see in places so objects in unusual places. And this is something that Depeche have also followed, at least in all their early album covers. Now, I might be making a reach too far. Wouldn't be the first time, certainly won't be the last. But instead of that, that's 10 minutes talking about Anton Corbijn and Depeche, where I should be talking about Construction Time Again, which is the band's third album, and there's plenty to talk about with this album. And what I wanted to do was to give you a guided tour through the record, which, by the way, I think is not one of their best albums, but it's got a lot to recommend it. So the first period where the four-piece Depeche Mode with Alan Wilder on keys recorded was Get the Balance Right. And that's the first single that you can see there. Look, lovely bit of good design. But that's the first time that the band started to bring in, apart from the cover of A Broken Frame, they started to reference international visions, international imagery. You know, this looks very much like Soviet brutalist architecture and icons, things that you might see on the entrance doors to factories or perhaps to the male toilets in there, which is kind of also brought about in this sleeve image here, which is obviously effectively a hyper stylized graphic of a worker holding a hammer, which is also further reflected on the cover to the next single, Everything Counts. Again, a man with a hammer. And on the 12-inch, again, a different cover, a different picture completely for the 12-inch and the 7-inch of Everything Counts. Those are two completely different illustrations. A man with a hammer. And this is why I think Get the Balance Right kind of sits in the band's Construction Time Again period. So the front cover of Construction Time Again, man with a hammer. And on the back, a man with a hammer. And obviously the fourth release from this period, the second single, is Love in Itself. Lo and behold, he's holding a hammer. Well, it's not really a hammer. I don't even know what the word is for it. It's a hammer with a very, very long handle. Maybe there's a special word for that. To be honest, I'm quite glad I don't know the special word for that, because there's only so much space in my brain, and like Homer Simpson, every time I learn something new, something old gets pushed out. So the first single from the album properly itself is this classic here, Everything Counts. Now, Everything Counts is the oldest song written by Martin Gore that will regularly appear in the Depeche Mode set list, and it's also the oldest song that they've played with any great frequency. They play Just Can't Get Enough at maybe half of their tours. They play Photographic very, very rarely. I think they played Leave in Silence a handful of times in 2006 or 2010. But aside from that, Everything Counts is the oldest song that you will hear or see at the vast majority of Depeche Mode songs. I think it's the first song that Martin wrote that the band really feel still connects to who they are. It's also probably one of the first mature song that Martin Gore wrote. And by mature, I mean, obviously the songs that were on A Broken Frame were written, at least some of them, when he was 14 or 15, when he was in the band called Norman and the Worms, which I mentioned previously. And Norman and the Worms had songs like The Meaning of Love, A Photograph of You, very anodyne, very direct, very sappy love songs. With no guile in them at all and very little in the way of life experience. Everything Counts was the first song that the band released that really felt like it had been written by an adult, if that makes sense, as opposed to perhaps the juvenilia of A Broken Frame. Now, Everything Counts has a terrible lyric about being insincere in your career in Korea, which is an awful lot of rhymes, which is, you know, a very standard, very basic AAA rhyming structure. But almost all of the songs on the album have been inspired by the places that the band had seen on their first proper world tour. So Speak and Spell, they played some shows in Europe, I think a couple of shows in America maybe. They hadn't gone to places like Thailand or Hungary. They hadn't really seen Deprivation. And on the Broken Frame tour, I think they went to Thailand, I think, for the first time. And they you know, were there seeing child slaves in the streets and children that had been sold into prostitution and real kind of heart-breaking, soul-crushing, endless, cruel poverty. Now, I should say, when this album came out in 1983 and when the album was written and recorded, was probably just in the shadow of the Falklands War. It was also coming to the end of the first term of Margaret Thatcher as the Conservative leader, and she was a very divisive leader, very unpopular. Certainly where I grew up, I got the feeling that my town, my suburb, our lives were meaningless and nothing to the government. We were effectively, you know, disposable cannon fodder. And there was no investment in our local schools, in our local environment. In fact, even in the city of Liverpool, the government made a decision to organise a managed decline, effectively, you know, deliberately starving a city of its desperately needed resources. But the poverty that I saw when I was a child, you know, I mean, I experienced it to some extent, but not to the extent that the band saw when they went to Thailand, as I've said, with things like child slavery and sexual exploitation and things like that. So all of those life experiences built into Construction Time Again. And Construction Time Again was an album that kind of directly addressed, I think, the financial and economic structure of society, the inherent injustices and unfairness of those structures, and perhaps came forward with I think effectively almost like a version of the Labour manifesto that you could dance to at the time. Everything Counts is very much a song about money, power and work. The B-side is called Work Hard. I mean, that's pretty blatant, isn't it? That's really putting it out there. And of course, the chorus goes, you've got to work hard if you want anything at all. And this was also reflected in the band's sonic kind of approach that they took. So we flip over to the B-side of Everything Counts. There it is. Work Hard is one of the very, very few, if not the only, co-write between Martin Gore and Alan Wilder. So Alan had joined the group. He was officially a member of the band. He was playing on the recordings, and he kind of slotted very easily into his place in the group. Effectively, I think Vince Clarke later said that he heard that Alan was doing almost all of the actual music and a lot of the production when the band were recording, when Alan was in the group, and Vince said, well, you know, the rest of the group were never that interested in things like, you know, synthesizers, production, DX7s, or so on and so forth. And Vince took the lead on a big chunk of the Speak and Spell album. So Everything Counts is, I think, a great song. Actually, absolutely love it. Seen them play it dozens of times. Well, not dozens of times, but easily 2/3 of the shows I've been to by Depeche. And it's a great song, and obviously Work Hard, the B-sides, it all ties into an understanding around the way in which parts of the economy all slip together and fit together. I was going to mention the live 12 inches actually, but I mentioned those I think in the last episode. So the live 12 inches, Forget the Bands Right, Everything Counts, and Love in Itself there, which effectively was the first Depeche Mode live album, live in Hammersmith, 1982. The album itself then followed in August 1983. Here is the cover design by, I think, Brian Griffin and Martin Atkins. The photography is by Brian Griffin, and as you will see, as I already pointed out, this is the actual Matterhorn mountain. You know, why bother photoshopping it when you can fly there and actually stand in front of the goddamn thing yourself? And on the, you know, the flip side of it, again, there's a worker toiling in nature, much like the cover of a Broken Frame, actually. This one is, I think, perhaps as an album, it's more geared towards, you know, tying in with the iconography which you would see. So this looks like it could be a motivational poster in a Russian factory. You know, worker meet parasite, that type of thing. Or it looks like it could be, you know, a motivational poster again there on the railway, telling you that, you know, the workers together will defeat poverty and the evil pig dogs of capitalism, something like that. But as an album, I think it's one of my least favourite Depeche Mode albums, and the reason it's one of my least favourite Depeche albums is actually deliciously simple. Is that I think the songwriting it's not quite mature. It's the first time that Martin has written songs from a mature perspective, but it's not the first time that the songs are mature, if that makes sense. So instead of looking inwards towards, you know, the songs of love and you know, pain and suffering in various tempos, all the songs on A Broken Frame, they're almost all exclusively around, you know, relationships. Reminding me of, I think I've probably mentioned this before, if you've read George Orwell's 1984, there's a machine called the versificator in that, which generates meaningless songs that people can sing. You listen to Stock Aitken and Waterman, who, by the way, I absolutely love, Motown, Take That, songs by Vince Clarke. They're all songs that actually they sometimes they feel like they've not actually been written by a human hand, but they've either been written by a committee, probably with Max Martin involved, or in some other way, songs that aren't actually about anything that serves as a distraction from the grinding realities that people face. You know, I miss you, I love you, I come back, go away. You know, those are like the four main kind of themes that we've got for pretty much all of the love songs that there are. And that's not criticism of love songs. Some of them are incredible. You know, there's a John Grant song called It Doesn't Matter to Him, which is probably the greatest single love song ever written. A very powerful song about the human condition. But in this album, love was apart from being mentioned in Love in Itself, it was pretty much sidelined, and the whole of the album is about the world, the economy, nature, finance, society, and political factors. So you've got the inner sleeve here, and you've got the original Mute Records kind of thing there, and again, as you can see, the imagery is related to, you know, there's a man standing in an abstract fashion. Now, I must say, these sleeve designs have not helped the records in terms of how they've aged. They look like slightly better than OMD as opposed to something timeless like New Order. But all that changes. And it doesn't help because it's very much an album of its time. And its time is, you know, 4 p.m. in November 1982. So the album starts with Love in Itself, which is an unusual song. Then there's more than a party, Pipeline, Everything Counts, 2 minute warning, Shame, The Landscape is Changing, Told You So, and Then. And if you can see, by the way, my inner sleeve, because I haven't fixed it, is ever so slightly coming through. But you know, that's glue that's 38 years old. So be gentle on it now. These records weren't designed to be kept for 38 years. They were designed to be sold, played, trashed, and then replaced. You know, no one was thinking about, well, what's the world going to look like in 2021? And is some idiot on YouTube going to be talking about Depeche Mode? The answer is no, of course. They weren't even thinking about that. They hadn't even thought about the internet. The nearest thing they got to the internet was thinking about Whopper and war games and the fact that you could, you know, ring up your local nuclear missile test base facility. That's as far as they got. They'd not even thought about the fact that 38 years from then, people were going to be talking about these albums on the internet. What the hell's the internet anyway? And what, mobile phones? What, phones that move, that sit in someone's pocket as opposed to ringing a place where the person is at, and then the phone could also be a camera. And what? No, my brain hurts. I want to go back to the days of VHS. Anyway, so the album is, you know, it's not amazing. And I'm saying a lot because I don't have a script, by the way, not because I'm a prime minister. Although obviously, if I was a prime minister, I've been talking in much the same way as if I'd just been caught with a text message from my 72nd mistress from being caught by my fourth wife. I think I'm not sure. We've got to grab this thing by the scruff of the throat and shove it down its neck. And oh God, I hate Boris Johnson. Sorry, I shouldn't be talking about him. Love in Itself is what I should be talking about. It's a great song actually, but it's a very obvious song. It's very straightforward. It's the song that most sounds like something off a Broken Frame, actually. But also, at the first point, it also kind of clears the decks for the rest of the album, because it kind of goes, right, so love in itself is an absurdity that lays before us. And it says all of these insurmountable tasks that lay before me, all of the firsts and the definite lasts that lay in store for me. There was a time when all was on my mind was love, and now I find that most of the time love's not enough in itself. So in effect, it's almost a manifesto statement to go, all those old love songs, not going to talk about them on this album. The rest of the album doesn't even mention, I think, love or anything like that at all. Second, and it's Love in Itself has the most dated production, so it's got like trumpets and horns, but it also starts to bring in Alan Wilder's influence. There's a lot of use of found sounds, sounds of percussive instruments, but also percussion that's not necessarily standard, so banging on metal pipes, throwing things down hallways, chucking stones at objects, vacuum cleaners, God knows what it was. You know, almost taking the an extrapolation from Pink Floyd's Household Objects, which was abandoned during recording in 1975. Which, and the whole point of Household Objects was to make an album was made with household objects that would sound like music, but they gave up when they realized it was really, really hard. Depeche Mode just went, sod that, we're going down the building site and we're going to clank some stuff with some hammers. So a lot of the percussive stuff that we have in this album is very much the sound of industry, of construction time, of work and buildings and physical manual labour. There's a sound of trains that runs through a couple of the segues in between the various songs. There's the sound of what sounds like the registers of cash, you know, all that type of stuff. The same use of found sounds, which again you almost had in Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. And it also kind of starts to lean the band towards being clearly more than a pop group. So Martin had seen Einstein and Newboughton, I think, in 1982, and was like pretty interested in the way that they used sounds to create textures. And the rest of the band picked that up and ran with it with great aplomb. So a lot of this album is almost pre-industrial, very, very influential on bands like Front 242, Night to Rem, Nine Inch Nails, Skinny Puppy, Front Line Assembly, all of those bands. You know, this was a pop group that was weird and they were slowly turning weird in front of your eyes, but they were doing it so slowly that most people didn't even realise how weird they were becoming. And so, for example, More Than a Party, we've got this fast, pacey track, which is, thinking about the lyric of it, you might think, well, it's a party, isn't it? But it's more than a party. And by talking a party, there's two versions of the words. One of which is obviously the party where you actually go to someone's house and you drink and you talk rubbish and you try and talk to somebody that you think is good looking and you inevitably make an arse of yourself. And then there's the other one, which is a political party. Which is the same kind of thing. It's about a common group, a mass of people that are all pointing in the same direction with the same ideals. And the lyrics around this, it says this is more than a party. Very simplistic, very straightforward. In fact, they do a reverse Black Sabbath by speeding the track up towards the end, towards the climax. Whereas I think it's War Pigs, I think, by Black Sabbath, slows down. This one speeds up. But it's a song where I think it's one of my least favourite songs on the album because it's so simplistic and straightforward. But it leans into the third song, which is Pipeline, which gives the album its title, because the second line of the first verse of Pipeline is construction time again. What is it this time? We're laying a pipeline. And it's around, on this golden day, work's been sent our way. This could last a lifetime, working on the pipeline. It's all around, the dignity of labour, and also around, the striving of humanity towards trying to achieve something a little bit more than the sum of its parts. And then side one ends with Everything Counts, which, aside from the truly terrible line about the turning point of a career in Korea being insincere, the holiday was fun-packed, the contract still intact. Very simplistic writing, but also very much around money, business, economics, finance. And London Docklands was being redeveloped around about this time, so Canary Wharf didn't exist until the mid to late 80s. Money was flowing into London, the markets were being deregulated, which is obviously has a side effect now in the construction of London, where there's huge amounts of financial inequity, and London is effectively two cities wrapped inside one, where it's one city that's very poor that's propping up one part of the city that's actually very well off, and the two parts only really meet in corridors, service ways, and on tube tracks. Everything Counts is around effectively the monetisation of London and Britain and an economy, and it's a prophetic song. It's probably also ties in a bit with Heaven 17's Penthouse and Pavements, which I don't know very well at all, but it also kind of almost serves as a bit of a warning around what the future may have. Lots of surprises in store. Flip the album over. Side 2 has 2-minute warning, and it's difficult to overemphasize just how pervasive constantly the threat of a 2-minute warning was. When I was growing up, and remember I was 10 when this album came out, so there was a Cold War between Russia, China, the communist states, and the West, and the capitalist states, and it sometimes got pretty damn hot, and the war came pretty close to a couple of events. Firstly, there's the Bay of Pigs event, and there's also, I think there was a Russian incident with a signal which came very, very close to having nuclear missiles being launched in the 80s. We all lived in fear of the end of the world. We thought at any minute there could be that sound, that siren that appears in Frankie Goes to Hollywood's Two Tribes. We could all be vaporised in 4 minutes. We wouldn't even have enough time to have a decent piss and wash our hands before we all got blown away in a nuclear holocaust. And it was there constantly. I went to bed near enough every night in the 80s, remembering watching Threads on television. Threads, by the way, is one of the grimmest television programs ever. It's about the side effects and after effects of a nuclear explosion. There was also a film in 1986 called When the Wind Blows, which was a lovely, cheery, animated cartoon movie about dying of radiation poisoning following a nuclear war, which was also followed by Studio Ghibli's absolutely heartbreaking Grave of the Fireflies, which has a very, very similar plotline. We all lived in threat of the air attack warning, the 4 minutes that would tell us that the world would come to an end and the nuclear missiles had been launched. And given that Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and the Russians were all in charge of the respective nuclear arsenals, and obviously Trump very, very recently, it's fair to say I didn't think I'd live to my age now. I thought if I was lucky, I might get to possibly go to a pub, or to hold a girl's hand, or to have a relationship. I didn't think I'd get to grow old. I thought I'd be, wiped out and evaporated in a nuclear explosion around about October 1991. So 2 Minute Warning is a song that's very much around that. So we're lying by the orange sky. And part of the orange sky kind of implies that the sky's on fire. I should point out, by the way, I think 2 Minute Warning is one of Alan's first solo songs, in so much as it's so 2 Minute Warning and The Landscape is Changing are two of the songs that Alan wrote. And Alan, by the way, is a pretty damn competent songwriter. What I felt with these songs, and also the songs that he wrote on Some Great Rewards, is that he was trying to write songs that sounded like Depeche Mode, as opposed to songs that he honestly felt were good representations of his artistic intentions. And he tried, and Alan's been quite open. He doesn't like the songs that he's written for Depeche Mode. He doesn't think they're particularly good songs, and he stopped submitting songs in 1984. But this song, 2 Minute Warning, and The Landscape is Changing, are two songs that he wrote that appear on this album, obviously alongside the co-write in Work Hard. And they're good songs, but as you'll see from Alan's solo work, is that they're not the type of songs that Alan would write if he had complete artistic control. It felt like Alan was trying to force himself to write Depeche Mode songs. And 2 Minute Warning, as I've mentioned before, the lyrics are very on the nose, very clear, very blunt, perhaps almost as obvious as Oliver Stone. War is wrong, 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 naughty, naughty, and war is stupid, and people are stupid, and that's a Culture Club song, I think. And so there's a lyric in there. The chorus of 2 Minute Warning is 2 Minute Warning, 2 minutes later, the time has come, my days are numbered. It's all about dying in a nuclear holocaust, which we all thought we were going to do in the 80s. And the newspapers treated war as if it was just, another national sport alongside football and snooker. Next song on the album is Shame, which is a Martin song. Very wordy song, Shame, and it has some of the strangest lyrics of any Depeche Mode song, which hasn't been written by Vince Clarke, which is, it all seems so stupid, it makes me want to give up, but why should I give up when it all seems so stupid? It doesn't really make sense. Admittedly, it makes a heck of a lot more sense than 95% of Speak and Spell. But it's a very obvious, straightforward song, questioning around children wallowing in dirt, crying with hunger, crying out with pain, and the sense of guilt that if you're somebody from a far more prosperous economy, when you're in somewhere that really experiences actual tangible mud in the water, worms in your eyes kind of level of deprivation, the guilt, the survivor's guilt that you have from living in that environment. It's okay, but it's not been played live since about 1984. Then there's The Landscape is Changing, the last song that Alan wrote out of the whole two for the album, around the destruction of the ecosystem for profit. It's okay. It's not the best Depeche Mode song by a long stretch, but it's very, very interesting, because during all of these songs, as I've mentioned before, the sounds of the industrial landscape, the sounds of vehicles, factories, cars, nature, trains, they're all starting to being used as percussive elements, which was probably in no small way influenced by Autobahn and Trans-Europe Express, which both features the sound of travel and machinery as percussive elements as well. It's all in there, so it's a great third album. I will never write a third album as good as this, by the way, even at my age, but it's very obvious. Now, I've said earlier about sixth form poetry in the lyrics, and there's lots and lots of sixth form poetry everywhere. I've got approximately 3 feet's worth of it in this very house. But it's an album that I think is more adolescent than perhaps we might originally think. And then there's the penultimate song on side 1 is Told You So. I haven't even mentioned yet Told You So. Now, Told You So is kind of like a furiously smug industrial Ramones. Now that sounds really, really weird when you think about it. The chorus is just go, they can go, told you so. They can go, told you so. We told you so, told you so, told you so. Told you so. And it's a very simplistic, very almost like a typewriter type rhythm, a very, so it's very short, very punchy melody lines, very reminiscent of the Ramones, very reminiscent of punk actually, and obviously, as I mentioned before, Depeche Mode started off as a kind of punky band. The other thing around that is "Told You So" is actually a complete rewrite of William. I think, who is it? William Blake? I think no, Milton's poem "Jerusalem." So the opening line of "Told You So" and "Did these feet in modern times." Now the opening line of Jerusalem is "And did these feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountains green?" And whereas here it was like, "And did these feet in modern times walk upon the flowers and walk upon their brothers?" It's a perversion of what is of the hymn Jerusalem, which also has the line about chariots of fire in, that's very closely linked to nationalism. It's been played at many, many funerals. My mum's funeral had Jerusalem played at it. I hate hearing the song as a result. But it's sung everywhere, by everybody. It's one of these patriotic songs about England's mountains green and a land of glory that you can achieve. So the last kind of section is, "Bring me my bow of burning gold, bring me my arrow of desire, bring me my spear, O clouds unfold, bring me my chariot of fire." And that is kind of like the saying, well, I've worked and I've strived and I've toiled on this land, this beautiful English land, and I need my heaven. And that's probably why that song is used in so many funerals. But the second verse in "Told You So" is, "Bring me my gun of itching desire, bring me my bullets and I will fire, sight set higher than a tall church spire." It's it's a pretty brazen kind of inversion and perversion of Jerusalem, the great hymn, and it's not the best Depeche Mode song ever. It's one of the one songs that actually, when I was listening to Depeche Mode for the first time, I bought the 7-inch single of "Somebody in Blasphemous Rumours," backed with live versions of, I think it's "Everything Counts" and "Told You So," which was about 60 pence. And I bought that because I could afford it, and I was going, "Told You So." So the first time I heard "Told You So" was the live version from the Liverpool Empire in 1984. And I was like, there's something really good about this band, but I don't quite know what it is. So the last song on the album is called "And Then," which was probably the last time that Dave Gahan sang in his airy upper register. Everything after that was more in that lower kind of area that he sang in. And Then is serviceable. It's a good song. It's nothing special, and I can see why the band don't play it live anymore. Now there's also a final unlisted track on Construction Time Again, which is the reprise of "Everything Counts." It's over 55 seconds of just the ending kind of refrain, which the band often use when they play "Everything Counts" live. That is Construction Time Again. It is the third Depeche Mode album, and it's pretty good. It's not my favourite. It's a really fascinating kind of bridging step between the adolescent juvenilia of Speak and Spell and A Broken Frame, and the stuff that they were going to get to by the time they got to Violator, the dark, the perverted, the miserable but hopeful. Now there was a second single from the album, "Love in Itself." Here is the 12-inch, which, as you can see, unsurprisingly has a man with a hammer on it, and there are there's the "Love in Itself 3", which is the 12-inch mix of the track. There's a track called "Falls" brackets bigger, which is a 12-inch version of the B-side of "Love in Itself," which is the B-side of "Love in Itself" is just "Falls," and then there's "Love in Itself 4", which originally I think was called "Cocktail," and is effectively a very flippant, silly, kind of jazzy elevator music style interpretation of "Love in Itself." "Love in Itself" is one of my least favourite Depeche Mode singles, is fair to say. Now there was a couple of other kind of releases which I should bring out for your attention. There's the original 1989 Mute Records CD in the UK, when the catalogue finally got issued on CD in its original mastering. There is I think this is the French Blue Stripe CD of Love in Itself as a CD single when the CD singles were released in a very haphazard fashion in the late 80s. The band also went on tour. This is a bootleg called Beautiful Boys, featuring the immortal whacking a bicycle tyre imagery on there. This is from a BBC radio broadcast at the Hammersmith Odeon in 1983. It's quite good. Really should be on a box set. And the last thing that I'm going to mention is the inevitable 2006 Super Audio CD and DVD with the 5.1 mix and documentary. If you're going to get one version of the album, this is the one to go for. You know, I wasn't sure I'd be able to find enough to talk about in this album for 45 minutes, but I have, and hopefully that's been an insight into Depeche Mode's album Construction Time Again, which is not my favourite Depeche Mode album. It was probably the best one they'd made so far, but Depeche Mode are one of the few groups that got better and better and better over time, up to a certain point. But we will get to that in due course. I think this is episode 111 of me talking about my stuff. So I will be talking again at some point about something. It might be David Bowie, it might be New Order, at which point I'm definitely going to have to change my t-shirt. Who knows? Hopefully you're having a lovely time. It was midsummer, I think yesterday. Hopefully you didn't get stitched into a bear suit and burnt alive. If you did, why the hell are you watching this? Anyway, be lovely in the comments, and I will see you all again sometime soon. Thank you, and bye.